Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer and I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in working with people who have tinnitus to help them to manage their tinnitus. Apart from tinnitus management, I also work with people who have hearing related problems and some people with hyperacusis or hypersensitivity of hearing. And I also work with people who have general mental health adjustment issues as I am trained as a psychologist. And a major part of today's talk has been presented in the ATA annual general meeting last year. So if you have heard this talk, just bear with me. Okay. So just very briefly, what is tinnitus? Tinnitus is a perception of sound when there is no such external source of sounds. Some very common examples of tinnitus: ringing sound, buzzing sound, roaring sound. Some people say they feel that it's cicadas living in their head. Okay, it can be static sounds or white noise sounds. Okay, and for people who have never heard tinnitus, it's very hard to imagine what that can be like. How can you have a sound that's going on in your head all the time? However, for people who experience this all the time, it's certainly a very real experience, and we certainly know that it's not an imagined thing. It's really that people are perceiving the sounds. Okay, so what causes tinnitus? There are several, a number of physical factors that are related to tinnitus. So things like wax against eardrum, tumor on the hearing nerve, hearing loss, Meniere's disease, head injury, ear infection, or exposure to very loud sounds. There are also a number of psychological factors that are related to tinnitus, common ones like stress and anxiety. And we certainly have quite a few people who come into our clinic and they say, I had tinnitus after I had this long period of very stressful time, and that's really common that we see. However, you don't have to have the above mentioned conditions to experience tinnitus. And a study in 1953 by Heller and Bergman is a classic example of how that could happen. Okay, so in the study, they recruited 80 people. Now those 80 people, they had no history of tinnitus, no medical conditions, pretty healthy in general. They put each one of them in a soundproof booth for 5 minutes. Now those people were told to go in there, and if they could hear anything after that 5 minutes, come out and report back. So they kind of thought they were going to have some form of hearing test. But actually, they went in there for 5 minutes of absolute silence. Guess what happened? Yes, you're right. Not all of them, but 93% of those people came out, reported that they heard ringing, some heard buzzing, some heard roaring. So basically, they heard tinnitus in that 5 minutes of absolute silence. So now, those people, they were healthy people. You just put them into a soundproof booth for 5 minutes, they heard tinnitus. So that study shows that tinnitus can be a natural, our body's way to try to compensate a very silent place. So it can actually be a very natural phenomenon for a lot of people. Okay? So what does that mean? Now, if you think about our body, with everything that's going on inside our body, okay? So we have what? Heart pumping, blood rushing, digestive system, muscular things, breathing, neurochemical things happening all the time. It's actually a very busy place. And it's not hard to imagine that it's probably also a very noisy place as well. However, the assumption is that when we were young, when we were just born, we probably heard a lot of these sounds from the inside of our body. However, gradually as time goes on, our brain learns to habituate to the sounds, meaning that the brain learns that, all right then, these sounds are here 24/7. Doesn't make a difference if I focus on them or not. So gradually, the brain learns to not hear them. However, for those 80 people, when they were in that sample booth, very little sounds were coming in from the external world. So our brain started to tune into our body, try to get more sound to compensate for that silence. And therefore, hey, we hear tinnitus. Okay? So for a lot of people, that could have been happening for their tinnitus. And we certainly see a lot of people who come to our clinic, they told me that the first time they heard their tinnitus was when they were on holiday in a very quiet resort. They were just, chilling out and they heard something. And they go, oh, what's going on? And they found that, whoa, actually I am hearing sounds from the inside of my head or inside of my body because they were in a very quiet place. And we had another guy who came to our clinic who said that he suffered tinnitus, and he actually got tinnitus out of a 2-week meditation retreat. Okay, and you can imagine that he probably spent a lot of time meditating in silence, and that he had tinnitus. Okay, so for a lot of people, tinnitus can be a natural phenomenon. Now, when people come to see me, usually what I will always ask them is whether they drink coffee or tea or Coke, energy drinks, chocolate. And the reason for that is because all of these things contain stimulants like caffeine. Okay? Now, stimulants can increase our physical arousal. And increased physical arousal means that we are more alert. All of our level of awareness will be heightened. So you also find it hard to fall asleep when you have high physical arousal. Now, the higher the physical arousal, the sharper all of your senses will be, including the perception of tinnitus. So the actual mechanics of tinnitus probably never really changed, but when you have high physical arousal, your perception of tinnitus could increase. And that's why a lot of people say when they have a lot of coffee, they notice tinnitus increase. That makes sense. Okay? Now, we all have different tolerance to caffeine. So some people go away and they cut down caffeine and they say, oh, my tinnitus is really good now. Okay, and my sleep is also really good. Well, that's understandable. However, some people, they go away and they cut down their caffeine intake. Nothing's changed. Okay, so we all have different tolerance towards caffeine, but it's worth a try if you find tinnitus really bothersome. Okay, now, some people say, well, I don't drink coffee, I don't drink tea, I have very minimal caffeine intake. So substance-wise, there shouldn't be any reason for me to have high physical arousal. However, physiologically, we call it physical arousal. Psychologically, we call it frustration, annoyance, stress, anxiety, anger. All of these emotions will increase your physical arousal. So you can have zero caffeine intake, but if you're always stressed, and the stress can come from tinnitus, but you are always stressed, then you are going to have pretty high physical arousal. So again, a lot of people say to me, oh gosh, when I'm really stressed or when I had a long day at work, oh, tinnitus is just over the roof. Okay, and that's understandable. And that's why stress management is a huge part of tinnitus management. How we react to tinnitus emotionally plays a huge role on how we are going to be able to cope with tinnitus. So in here you see that if you hear tinnitus and the reaction is anxiety or frustration or annoyance or high stress, then you are going to have high physical arousal. With high physical arousal, what happens to your tinnitus? Even higher. Okay, so it creates a vicious cycle that kind of make the whole thing worse for you. Okay, so even though a lot of people, when they go to the doctors for their tinnitus, the doctors may say, look, there's really little that we can do medically to remove your tinnitus. However, there are so much that we can do psychologically to help manage the tinnitus. So the tinnitus management, the focus is to manage it, not to get rid of it. Okay? It's to manage it. And so we can see that someone can react very negatively towards tinnitus. It can be something that's really troublesome for the person. We want to help this person to be able to live well with tinnitus, so that tinnitus can be there, but we are still living our life, basically. And in order to do that, we do tinnitus retraining therapy as well as cognitive behavior therapy. Now, tinnitus retraining therapy is a kind of therapy that provides a very good model that explains how our brain processes sound. Now, think about all the sounds that we are exposed to every day. We are actually exposed to an incredible amount of sounds every day. If I give you a task to list out all the sounds that you've been exposed to today, so far, you are probably going to struggle, because there are simply so many sounds that we are exposed to, but we are not really aware of. Now, when you walk down the street, you hear the sounds of maybe wind sounds, traffic sounds, traffic light sounds, footsteps sound, maybe a dog walking past by, maybe there's birds chirping away. We're exposed to so many sounds. But how come it's so hard for us to remember them? Because these sounds, they don't mean much to us. They are in the background, so even when they are happening, we are usually not very aware of them, even though some of the sounds can be very loud. Okay, so now it's really because the meaning of these sounds are low. They don't mean much to us. Therefore, our perception of them reduces, because there's no point worrying about these sounds, so we are not really aware of them. I don't know whether you have the experience of, say, going to a party, and you are engaged in a conversation with someone, a very interesting conversation, and then when you are talking, you hear someone saying your name somewhere, and you go, oh, who's talking about me? Okay? Now, the voice may not be loud at all, but you can just pick it up. You may not be able to pick up all the other words the same person said, but you can just pick up the sound of your name. And that tells us that the perception of sound does not only rely on how loud the sound is, but more importantly, what the sound means to you. Now, the sound of your name will mean a lot to you. Therefore, our brain automatically is very sensitive to pick up sounds like that. And another good example is a lot of new moms. They say they can be woken up by the tiniest sound their baby is making, but they can sleep through a thunderstorm. Okay, so that's a very good illustration of how our brain filtering in and out sounds. And it doesn't really matter the volume of the sound. Okay, so for sounds that are meaningful to us, we are going to have high awareness of them. For sounds that are not so meaningful, then we are going to have low awareness of them. So, for people who are bothered by tinnitus, surely tinnitus can't be a trivial sound that you don't worry about. If you are bothered by tinnitus, then the sound of tinnitus is something that is important in a way to you. Therefore, what does our brain do? Our brain turns into the sound of tinnitus. Our brain is very good at picking up sounds of tinnitus. Now, a lot of people say to me that they have the tendency to monitor their tinnitus. So they will be going, oh, how's my tinnitus now? Oh gosh, it's still here. Okay. So a lot of people do that. So it's almost like you're always constantly bringing the attention back to tinnitus. Tinnitus and concentration, best friends. Okay. If you focus on your tinnitus, you're going to hear your tinnitus. And when you continue to focus on your tinnitus, the perception of your tinnitus may increase. And that's just a natural thing that it does. Okay? So the goal of tinnitus retraining therapy is to habituate to tinnitus. Okay, so habituating to tinnitus so that we hear tinnitus, but we kind of go, oh yeah, who cares? Okay. Now, how do we do that? We do a lot of education around tinnitus. We understand how our brain processes sound, and we also use constant neutral sounds to help with this process. A constant neutral sound can be rainfall sound. Okay, that's constant, that's neutral. It doesn't make you feel upset or angry or anything, it's just in the background. Some people say that they use a fan that goes. Okay, that's constant, that's neutral. So basically we make use of a lot of environmental ambient sound for them to use. Now, the idea behind this is that if we have something that's constant and neutral that's going on in the background, it's almost like a way of tricking the brain into thinking that, okay, that sound's there all the time. I don't mind that sound. I know it's harmless, and this sound is here all the time too. Gradually, we want them to be associated together so that we become more and more habituated to tinnitus. Okay? So habituation is that the sound is there, but you are not bothered by the sound. Now, imagine that you are at home, okay? Maybe at night at home, and it's pouring rain outside, thunderstorm, okay? When it first starts, you probably go, oh gosh, whoa, all right, pretty loud, okay. And what do you do after that? You do your own thing. You go on to eat your dinner, you watch your TV, some people read, some people talk, some people sleep, okay. Now, 3 hours later, let's say someone said, gosh, it's been pouring rain outside for the past 3 hours. And your attention goes back to the rain and you go, oh yeah, wow, isn't it loud? Okay, so even though the rain has always been there, the volume of the rain hasn't changed, but what happened in the past 3 hours? You were not bothered by the sound. You were living your life the way you want. So that is habituation to sound. Another example, imagine people who live in the countryside and they move to a big city near a train track. Okay, and so they now have to endure the freight train going by every few minutes. Okay, do they then have a miserable life? Not necessarily, because our brain has that ability to habituate to sound. So maybe in the first week they had really poor sleep, but usually gradually we kind of get used to it. So maybe sometime later their friends visit them and they go, oh gosh, how can you sleep with that? And they say, what? Oh, you mean the train sound? I don't hear them now. Okay, what's happening here? The train hasn't moved, okay? It's still there. However, because we habituate to the sound, we accept that, okay, the train is going to be there. Doesn't really work if I get angry at them. Okay, I'll just let it be. Gradually, with the adjustment of our attitude, we get better with tinnitus. And that's what we see over and over again in our therapy. That by the end of it, people say, yeah, I still have tinnitus, but I don't worry about it. I'm sleeping, I'm eating, I'm driving, I'm going to work, I'm enjoying my life. Okay, it's fine that I have tinnitus because it doesn't matter. I'm not bothered by tinnitus. Okay, so that's becoming a lot neutral towards tinnitus. Another huge part of therapy that we do is called cognitive behavior therapy. So in this kind of therapy, we look at, in a situation, what kind of thoughts do we have? The reason for looking at the thoughts and beliefs is because they do trigger our emotional response. They do lead to our behaviors. Okay? Now, for someone who hears tinnitus and she feels that this is the end of the world, she is probably going to feel quite miserable. She is going to find it really hard to get moving, to do things. And what she will actually be doing is she will place a lot of concentration on tinnitus all the time because it's a threat. You have to check in on your tinnitus, okay? So when you do that, then again, it's a vicious cycle because you believe that way and you feel anxious, therefore you have to monitor it, therefore you hear it a lot, and so it just continues on and maintains the problem, okay? So in CBT, what we do is we look at thoughts, we identify any unrealistic or biased, unhelpful thoughts that we have, and we challenge them. With the challenge that we do to the thoughts, we will come up with alternative or more realistic thoughts about tinnitus, which will lead to better emotional response. So someone who has a very realistic understanding of tinnitus will probably feel more calm, and they will not be sucked into the downward spiral of the negativity of the worst case scenario with their tinnitus. So they can feel a lot better with their tinnitus, okay? So I'll give you an example of negative thoughts for tinnitus, all right? So we have a situation, the situation is that you hear your tinnitus. Thoughts can be, tinnitus is making me anxious. I can't enjoy anything. My life is ruined, okay? So with that, if you truly believe these thoughts, then the feeling will be maybe anxiety, maybe sadness, depression, anger, and the behavior is probably going to be socially withdrawn. You don't want to participate in a lot of things. You may be sitting at home focusing on your tinnitus, and what happens when you do that? Increased perception of tinnitus. Okay, so obviously this is not a very helpful way in dealing with tinnitus. So let's look at the more realistic thoughts, okay? So same situation, you hear your tinnitus. Thought can be, well, I get anxious when I hear tinnitus. Well, I can learn to manage my anxiety, and my life is certainly not ruined. Yes, I get more anxious, but I still have a lot of things that are going on for me. All right, if you truly believe these thoughts, now, the feelings are going to be less anxiety and less sadness and less anger, maybe more motivated to go out and to do things, live a life, and not focusing so much on tinnitus, okay? So together with tinnitus retraining therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, we reach the end of neutralizing tinnitus for you, so that we are not exaggerating the impact emotionally that tinnitus has on us, and we will be able to live well with it, okay? So the therapy goals, firstly, we need to remember that it's a management, it's not a cure, okay? We are trying to deal with tinnitus. We are trying to manage tinnitus here. And in the therapy, we will be talking about a lot of information. We'll be practicing skills and techniques to help neutralize tinnitus, shift attention away from tinnitus, to challenge the thoughts, use relaxation techniques to manage our anxiety and stress, therefore reduce the physical arousal, okay? So tinnitus can still be there, but you are living your life, okay? So the big take-home message, you can do something about tinnitus. Okay, so that's my talk. Any questions?